Order and quality are, order is important in many cases. Probably one of the best examples I can give you is what I talked about earlier in terms of dealing with outliers before dealing with missing data. So order is often very important. But a couple things to just mention here. We definitely want to make sure that we define the outcome and the target. In fact, one of the things that I do a lot on the pre-modeling calls that I do with clients, especially new clients, we spend a heck of a lot of time talking about when they say, well, we want to do these particular models for these campaigns. It's a matter of going back and forth with the sub-service lines for each of those campaigns to make sure that, is it too granular or is it too broad? We don't want to target a group that's too broad, because we're probably missing prospects, and we don't want to target something that's too granular, because no matter what we do, if it's too granular, we're just not going to get enough. And then one of the things to keep in mind is that in a lot of campaigns, especially if they're new campaigns, that first round of responding is usually okay, and people are very happy with that. But what I always like to throw out there, don't forget that the first or even second level of responding will often be that low-hanging fruit. That's easy. Getting the low-hanging fruit is the easy part, because some people are going to walk in the door anyways. Where the rubber meets the road is after the low-hanging fruit are already acquired. How is your modeling working? How is your analytics working? Are you getting the prospects that are not the low-hanging fruit? You've got all the easy ones. Now let's get the ones that are a little trickier. That's where the concurrent analytics really comes in handy. The other thing I want to kind of add to that from a definitional standpoint is the whole idea of when people talk about responders. So we have, you have responders and you have converters. And if you think about typical campaigns, so one of the things that we often see is that someone will run a campaign, and what certain individuals that are part of that campaign are concerned about, they want to make sure that they have enough responders to the message that went out, whether it's an email blast or a link or a postcard or something like that. A responder, in their opinion, okay, their definition of a responder is a lead, a qualified lead that they can now give to the call center. So the call center is going to close the deal, but that individual is pretty much done because they got the responder they wanted that's now going to go to the call center. Well, what is the definition of that responder that's now going to the call center? It's certainly not a converter, but the individual who recruited that prospect, that part's done. Now we start over. So now we're in the call center. So the goal is we want to convert. So we want to get that responder to do something. And then it gets a little complicated, because let's say that it's for a surgical procedure. We get an individual via the call center. Now they did a site visit. They came on site and they did a visit. Well, so we had a responder who moved to the next level and they did a site visit. But is that the definition of a converter? It may be yes, it may be no. It depends on who you're talking to in the organization. So where it gets a little bit tricky. So then the next level might be, all right, so now they came in for the preliminary labs required for a particular procedure. Well, does that mean they converted, or does that mean they just came in to do these particular labs? At the end of the day, a converter would be the person who came in and actually had the full procedure, including everything that came before that procedure. But what's interesting from my standpoint is I have to, depending on who I have on the team, I have to ask that question quite often in terms of, well, what is it for you? Is that a responder or is that a converter? And when you're putting together response analytics and using statistics for your response analyses, you always want to think of what is your numerator and what is your denominator? Are you judging your responders by how many ended up at the call center? How many showed up for the site visit, how many actually had the pre-surgical labs, and how many actually had the procedure. So it can get a little bit complicated in terms of how different individuals in the system define responder converter, and so on and so forth. So that's that's something I just wanted to throw out there. Again, this particular list, that second item, define and match your targets and prospects, clean all the data. That third bullet is kind of everything is related to clean data. You do the best you can in certain cases, but we really need to be dealing with the cleanest data we can. Run your descriptive and exploratory stats, build your segments and clusters, build your predictive models. And notice that I have building segments and clusters before building predictive models. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but generally from a statistical standpoint is that you start with the most simple statistics and you work your way up to the more complex statistics. So you start with the simple descriptive and what we call bivariate statistics, and then you work your way up to more of the multivariate. Segments and clusters are generally considered descriptive statistical techniques, whereas predictive modeling is an inferential technique. So that's generally, and then oftentimes what happens is when we're building segments and clusters, we often find more information that we can use that will go into building predictive models. After that, now we can start applying various pre-selects, various filters, including channel. A lot of our clients use multi-channel marketing, but very few of our clients use actual predictive modeling from the channels themselves. So a direct mail channel model, a text channel model, so on and so forth. Validating pre-selected sample elements against outcome and target samples, and basically you can start doing that once you have a response group. So how do my responders look like compared to who I targeted in the first place? Let's do, simply these are descriptive side-by-side profiles. Are the people responding? Are those the same people I targeted in the first place and whatnot? Because oftentimes what we find is that channels will dictate different types of responding. And, the classic example is that the younger folks are going to respond probably at least a little bit higher from anything that's technologically savvy, whereas the older folks will still tend to respond pretty well from direct mail, especially if they're in that 65, 70 and older group. Validation, again, like I said, is very, very important. Now, that when you see testing there, testing, one of the things that some of you may recall from way back when is that there's a saying called test, test, test. And a lot of the majority of the clients that our clients, Evariant's clients that I talk to from a modeling standpoint, I always bring up the question on every single call, how much are you testing? Are you testing? Do you want to test? The majority of our clients aren't testing. They want to test. We have some clients that are doing classic control groups. They might be doing some very, very few, maybe A/B splits and things like that. The beauty of testing is that it doesn't cost anything to test. And if you can apply any testing whatsoever, and there's a little bit more information there's a blog related to this particular webinar that's going out if it's not up already, and there's a really nice sort of a longer version of testing in there. But testing is where sort of, when I'm talking earlier about when we know kind of what's going on from a response standpoint and we can apply a higher level of the concurrent analytics to various campaigns. And one of the ways we do that is through the results of the testing. So we know that one group responded a little bit higher to one message. Another group didn't really respond at all to that message. So we're not even going to target that group anymore. We're going to put all our eggs in that one basket for that message. We're going to develop a new message for the group that didn't respond. And lo and behold, what we thought were non-responders, they were actually good responders. They just got the wrong message. You can only figure that out if you do some testing. So testing is absolutely huge. And, for those of you who are already working with us, definitely talk to us about adding some additional testing to your campaigns. And then, of course, conduct response validation analytics, and that's always pretty much built in. And then change what needs to be changed. And that's really, really important, especially, I've mentioned a couple times already, just because a campaign is doing very, very well, that's fantastic. Doesn't mean you can get, you know, an even higher response rate off an already solid performing campaign. What we'll tend to do is we'll tend to have that knee-jerk reaction for the campaigns that aren't performing very well, or maybe they're just, you're having mediocre response rates. But we'll spend a lot more attention on the average to poorly performing campaigns, and sometimes we won't even touch the good campaigns because we think, well, it's a great campaign, just leave it alone. Believe it or not, you can always improve those really, really good campaigns. So I just want to throw that out there. And then let's see, this last little point here. Remember, the process of optimizing concurrent analytics is dynamic, always subject to change. So just assume that whatever you're doing now, you're probably going to end up tweaking it a little bit for phase 2 or phase 3 or phase 4. And, you know, especially if you're doing things, you're running perhaps 4 mammography campaigns a year, you always have a certain expected response rate, everything's been going well for the last couple of years. Just because it goes well every quarter, and every time you do that sort of patient, non-patient, community-based mammography screening campaign, it doesn't mean you can't do better by throwing in a little bit more of that concurrent analytics knowledge.